Carley Townsend, a physiotherapist who works in pediatrics at Queen Alexandra Hospital in Victoria. And she also works with InReach Online Physio. Tonight, she is here representing InReach. Carley's going to be discussing the benefits of physiotherapy in children on the autism spectrum. Carley, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and I will hand off the hosting to you.
All right, thank you for that introduction. Right, as Sharon said, this is my talk through InReach, partnered with AutismBC, talking about physiotherapy for children with autism spectrum disorder. See, there we go. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Wasanich people and Songhees Nation, on whose traditional territories I live, learn, play, and do my work. So this is just a little outline of this presentation. So first, I'm just going to talk a little bit further about who I am and what my qualifications are. And then I'll talk a little bit about what InReach Online Physio Services is. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the research and what that says about gross motor development and autism spectrum disorder. Then I'll talk about the role of physiotherapy in autism spectrum disorder. And then lastly, we'll close with some questions and answers, just like Brock kind of outlined already, how you can ask those questions. Okay, so about me. So I went to UVic and I did my first undergraduate in microbiology, and then I did a second one in kinesiology. I then went on to do my master's of physical therapy in 2015. Upon graduation, I immediately started working in pediatrics. I knew right from the beginning that I wanted to work with kids. So I actually started working first at BC Children's Hospital, where I worked for about 4 years. And then I moved from Vancouver to Victoria, back home, and I started with Queen Alexandra working in the early intervention program. So that's working with children from birth to age 5. And so I also started recently working with InReach Online Physiotherapy. So that was just in the past year, doing their private physio services kind of on the side. So a little bit about InReach Online Physio. So it was established in 2018 with the goal of providing high quality physiotherapy services using video conferencing for people in remote and rural areas and for individuals who require receiving service in their home. So assessment is typically done by discussing your history as well as doing a movement assessment, and we treat through education and exercise. So there's actually quite a wide variety of physio services available, including acute injury, healthy aging, neurological rehab, pelvic rehab, concussion rehab, cancer rehab, and then of course, pediatric physio as well. Okay, so online booking for InReach allows for same day and same week appointments. We accept reimbursement through extended health benefits, so Pacific Blue Cross, Green Shield, Manulife, etc. You don't need a doctor's referral. We do work with several doctors' clinics throughout BC, typically in like the rural and remote north. And then also, I think this is an important note, is that we do 15-minute free complimentary sessions, and that can be really beneficial for kind of assessing whether or not you think that virtual video conferencing is going to work for you and your family. So you can make those online. You can set up a free consultation, or you can just email InReach to set one up. Okay, so language and personal identification is really a hot topic in the autism spectrum disorder community, with people having a variety of views. I really wanted to include this slide because I think it's really important. I think that language matters. And as an individual with autism spectrum disorder, or as a parent of a child with autism spectrum disorder, I think you have the right to define your own identity language or that of their child, especially when working with healthcare providers. So I just want to let you know that I'm happy to change my identity language when working with families and children one-on-one so that I meet you where you're at. But for the purpose of this presentation, I will be using person-first language. So I will be referring to children with autism spectrum disorder rather than identity-first language, for example, autistic child. I also will be referring throughout this presentation as to children with autism, and I'm using that to include children who have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, as well as children that have not yet been diagnosed, but that it is suspected. So I also just wanted to clarify, I've been using the term autism spectrum disorder, but for the rest of the presentation, I will just be saying ASD, which means autism spectrum disorder. Okay, so moving more into the bread and butter of this talk today. So hopefully this is kind of the real reason why you guys came and are watching this. So talking about gross motor skills and autism spectrum disorder. Behavioral, social, and communication features observed in children with ASD are well researched and well documented. But for the past 10 years, we've really started looking into gross motor differences between neurotypical children and children with autism. And it's begun to emerge and show that there are motor impairments as a feature of ASD. The current focus of therapies for ASD tends to de-emphasize the importance, though, of motor skill acquisition. So essentially, while we know that motor impairments are often present in children with ASD, these impairments tend to be neglected as they're not part of the diagnostic criteria for the disorder. So even though most children with autism have poor motor skills, physical activities are usually the last thing that people focus on. So what does the research say about gross motor skills and ASD? So looking specifically at early development, we can already start to see changes as young as 1 month. So babies at 1 month that will later go on to be diagnosed with ASD use their arms less frequently than their neurotypical peers and also had higher incidences of asymmetric visual tracking. Visual tracking is when you move something and eyes follow. So babies that would later be diagnosed with ASD also had a persistent head lag at 4 months. So around 4 months is where we start to see that nice chin tuck emerging when doing a pull to sit. And that's just pictured on this slide there, is a nice chin tuck when you're pulling on baby's hands to help them sit up. At 6 months, babies still had difficulties visually tracking, specifically tracking moving objects, and also had difficulties sitting independently. At 18 months, the visual tracking issues persisted. Persistent toe walking beyond age 2 is also more common in children with ASD than other forms of developmental disorders. And we know that motor skills such as reaching, crawling, walking, all of those are very important for learning social communication behaviors. So moving along from early development, in general, children with ASD tend to have below average motor skills that persist into adolescence. One study that had a sample size of over 11,000 children with ASD showed that 87% of them were at risk of motor impairment, but only 32% were receiving physiotherapy services. Another familial study showed that children with ASD in families with neurotypical siblings had lower motor proficiency scores than their typical siblings. While families consisting of siblings who both had ASD, they had similar low motor proficiency scores. So essentially, this means that those scores were likely due to their ASD and not due to their upbringing. Imaging studies have shown that children with autism rely more heavily on the part of their brain associated with conscious, effortful movement than that of their peers, while neurotypical children are able to rely on parts of their brains that are associated with automating tasks. So this means that even the simple task, such as tapping your fingers, requires significant cognitive effort for a child with ASD. Imaging studies have also shown less connectivity between the parts of the brain involved in coordinating and executing movements in children with ASD. Studies have also shown that children with ASD move less than their neurotypical peers, and that children with ASD are 2 times more likely to be overweight and nearly 5 times more likely to be obese. There are higher odds of overweight and obesity in older children aged 12 to 15 than in children aged 6 to 11. This particular study also acknowledged that some of the genetic differences causing ASD also affect weight gain, but were unable to account for this within their study, and so this was a limitation of their study. So what does that research mean for daily living? These differences manifest in anything that relies on balance, body awareness, and postural control. Motor skills can have an impact on participation in activities of daily living. Motor skills are really embedded in everything we do. We need coordination to brush our teeth, do up a zipper, fasten Velcro, or walk in a straight line. Children are all different though. It's important to note that. So some may have more difficulties with fine motor skills, some may have more difficulties with gross motor skills, and some may have difficulty with both. So what does that research really look like for children with ASD? So some toddlers may have difficulties and delays reaching fundamental gross motor skills, such as walking, crawling, sitting. Some children may have difficulty maintaining their posture and balance while standing still or moving, and this may look like an awkward and uncoordinated gait as they move. Some children have difficulties coordinating both their left and their right sides of their bodies simultaneously and in relation to one another, so such as while hopping or jumping. And some children have difficulty with hand-eye coordination, such as catching or throwing a ball. How can physiotherapy help children with autism? So research shows that there can be as much as a 6-month gap in gross motor skills in the early years, and that gap widens as children age. Early physical therapeutic intervention can lessen that gap or help children with ASD catch up to their peers. Motor programs do more than just improve their gross motor skills. They involve practicing hand-eye coordination, visual tracking, turn taking, and following both verbal and nonverbal communication. Small studies have suggest that in addition to increasing gross motor skills, movement-based therapies may improve social communication, attention, behavioral issues, and academic performance. So traditional studies, traditional applied behavioral analysis, or ABA therapy, quite often includes mainly tabletop activities. Physical therapists will get your child up and moving for therapeutic intervention and give you ideas on how you can incorporate more activities into your daily life. Physiotherapists are experts on helping children practice foundational movements that help them to improve their balance, postural control, and coordination. Physiotherapy can help your child to meet their gross motor milestones, improve the quality of their gross motor skills, such as throwing, catching, jumping, or even riding a bike. So a modifiable risk factor for being overweight or obese is the lack of physical activity. Physical therapists are movement experts who can help your child to become more active. Again, there are certain genetic mutations leading to ASD that also cause obesity. However, we know that being physically active is an important part of health that shouldn't be neglected even if a child isn't losing weight. So toddlers age 1 to 2 and preschoolers age 3 to 4 should accumulate 180 minutes of physical activity at any intensity throughout the day. So this could look like climbing stairs, moving around the home, playing outside, crawling, walking, running. The older that they get, the more energetic this movement and activity should be. Children aged 5 to 11 should accumulate at least 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity daily. This could include vigorous activity 3 days a week and strengthening activity 3 days a week. So some suggestions for activities include bike riding, playground activities, playing tag, running, swimming, and anything that should be considered vigorous should get your child sweating and out of breath. So youth, actually, it's the same guideline. So they should accumulate 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity daily, and it should include vigorous activity 3 days a week and strengthening activities 3 days a week. But some of the suggestions are a little bit different as children get older. So some things that they could do include skating, bike riding, running, rollerblading, going to the gym, or taking a fitness class. So then moving into what to look for when choosing a physiotherapist for your child. So physiotherapists all pass the same licensing exam. We all go through the same schooling. So any physiotherapist is licensed to treat any age. However, there are some physiotherapists that have really dedicated their careers and their post-schooling education towards working with children. So I would highly recommend looking for a physiotherapist with experience working with children, particularly children with neurodevelopmental disorders. Look for someone that's willing to include you as a parent in formulating a treatment plan, because when it comes to pediatrics, really parents are going to be heavily involved in executing this treatment plan. So you should be pretty involved when you're making it as well. There are a couple different online resources for finding a physiotherapist. So there's the Registry of Autism Service Providers, or the RASP list online, but there's not as many physios, I think, on that list as there are in the province. So if you're looking for someone based on your geography, you can look on the Physiotherapy Association of BC. There's a Find a Physio search function, and you can put in your geographical location, and you can also indicate that you would like to look for a physio that works with children, and it will pop out a list. So then moving into some really cool research that I found in the field of ASD and motor skills. So there's a study that just came out looking at video games, including striking a pose and holding it. So exercises with like a Wii or an Xbox Connect or a Nintendo Switch. And it actually showed that this training program, including these video games, helped children with ASD improve their balance and posture, because it was balance training. The other piece too that was interesting was that they enjoyed doing it. So another study looked at the secondary effects of a motor intervention. So it took two groups of children aged 4 years old with ASD, and they had a fundamental motor skills intervention. And what they found was that they had improved motor skills, but they also had improved social skills, listening skills, turn-taking skills, and transition skills just from this fundamental motor skill intervention. I found another brand new study that just came out in February that compared a creative movement and dance intervention with traditional ABA-based seated play in children aged 6 to 14 over an 8-week intervention. So what they saw was improved whole body coordination, balance, and imitation accuracy in the creative movement class when compared to the ABA seated play. Social smiling also increased more in the movement group, while compliant and interested affect increased more in the seated group. So I also just wanted to acknowledge and thank Sharon Grattan and Brock Shepard from AutismBC for their help in organizing this webinar, and also open it up to any questions or comments that people have. Yeah, that's kind of it there.
Thank you so much, Carly. One of the questions that we did receive is people are wondering if they can get the slides.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'll send the slides to you.
Okay, fantastic. And I can email it to everyone afterwards. If anyone else has additional questions they'd like to answer, if they could post it in the chat area, then I can ask Carly directly. I wanted to also just comment around the RAS list and what the funding might look like for children who are under 6 and children who are over 6. So Carly, as you are not currently on the RASP list, you're in the process of getting on the RASP list. What can that look like for families accessing service?
Yeah. So if you're wanting to access service specifically from me, because I'm not on the RASP list, you can't use your autism funding to get service from me. But so we accept extended medical benefits through InReach. There's also, you could do private pay if that's a financial option for you. There's a number of charities like Variety that we can also apply to funding for therapy. And then if your child's on the at-home program, there's sometimes, depending on their age, there can be funding through the school age extended therapy program, and they do fund virtual services. So there is a number of different options. So yeah, families, I totally encourage them to reach out via email if they have questions about funding, and if the cost is prohibitive, there's things we can do to work around that.
That's great. And for children that are over 6, they can use their autism funding for services. And another question that came up was, what is the difference between physical therapy and occupational therapy?
That's such a great question, and it's so common. I was asked this earlier today from a client of mine. It really depends on kind of like what context it is. So in the context of ASD, physiotherapists tend to look a lot more at motor skills. We don't focus as much on the fine motor skills, but it is definitely something we pay attention to. But with gross motor skills, think about like big movements, like walking, running, catching and throwing a ball, those sorts of things. The other piece that occupational therapists can be quite involved in is feeding. They're pretty involved in feeding. They're also involved in like toileting and toilet training, activities of daily living, and sensory. So they can definitely be involved in kind of sensory aspects of ASD as well. So there definitely is some big differences in the role of an OT and a PT, and that's why we tend to work really well together. Mm-hmm.
That's great. There is a question from Sasha. Sasha is asking, are there any activities you would recommend for doing in the home if therapy isn't an option? She commented, I manage a staffed resource and we have a youth who won't leave the house because of COVID. We cannot have anyone coming in right now.
Yeah, totally. So it definitely depends on like equipment in the house, the age of the child. It could be important too to kind of figure that out. But even something like going up and down the stairs can be an activity. If you're inside the home and you wanted to play with a ball, sometimes using a balloon is actually a really great option. Using rolled socks if you're using a smaller ball. Like there's definitely ways to make physio fun and to make physical activity fun. And I think that's one of the big things about being in pediatric physio is really my whole goal is to do fun and creative movement and really kind of set these kids up for healthy, active lifestyles as they age. Because we know that in general, kids are more active than adults. So what can we do to help make that activity so fun that they want to stay active? But yeah, like going up and down the stairs, throwing some balls, kicking a ball. If they have a backyard, like walking up and down slopes, like doing little, you can do obstacle courses, like treasure hunts can be kind of fun where you're like, put stickers somewhere depending on their age. That can be kind of a fun activity to do. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great, Carley. Thank you. There's another question from Denise asking around bladder control and if there are suggestions for assisting with awareness and if there are any physio suggestions on what might work for that.
Yeah, so pelvic health is actually a really interesting field of physiotherapy, but it's also a very unique field of physiotherapy. So unfortunately, that's not something that I have much expertise in. But if you are interested, there is a pelvic physiotherapist at InReach Physio who does provide online consultation, and that could be something that you guys could talk about. There are some other specific pediatric physical pelvic rehab physios. So if you're interested, I could also, yeah, you could, Sharon, you could give them my email address, and I'm happy to put them in touch with a physio that does pediatric pelvic health.
Okay, that's great. And I just want to also comment that next month we're going to be doing a talk on toileting with AutismBC. So that's going to be something to look forward to, that will go over that as well. We're going to be working with the BCBA on that talk. There was a question on if anyone in your practice works with young adults or autistic adults.
So, yeah, so I work with, typically I work with children under the age of 5, like in my daily job, but through InReach, I work with anyone kind of 0 to 20. But for adults with developmental delays or disorders, like I'm quite comfortable working with adults as well. If you do feel like there is more, they need more of an adult touch than kind of my more kid-friendly approach, then there definitely are physios that would be comfortable working with adults with developmental delays or any sort of neurodevelopmental disorders.
Okay, great. Another question was, are there any sensory feedback strategies to improve a child's awareness of their body posture and movements?
Yeah, so speaking specifically to like sensory pieces, so there's definitely, yeah, so there's a few things that we can do. There's certain pieces of equipment or clothing really that actually are tighter and made of specific materials, and they're called like SPIO suits. So they're a sensory processing input orthotic, and it's really like kind of wearing really tight clothes, and it does apply a little bit of a sensory feedback to your body while you're standing and can actually improve postural control. So SPIO suits can be kind of pricey. Another way to do it is to kind of just get a leotard and get it in a size too small, or to get Spanx. So, right, like shapewear for women in the smallest size you can, and that kind of tightness, it can give some interesting sensory feedback that can help with that postural control.
That's great. Okay, so it looks like we don't have a lot more questions. I think we could leave it open for a little bit here to see if anybody else would like to comment. And I'll just make sure that I've got nothing else on the chat here. Okay, it looks like we've covered mostly everyone. If anyone else has anything, please chime in. But thank you so much, Carley, for joining us. That was very informative, and I learned a lot myself about the benefits of physiotherapy. And as a parent with a child on the autism spectrum, I think it's definitely something that when my son was younger, I wish we had access to. So really appreciate this educational information session. And if there's anything else you would like to add, please do so.
I think that covered it, but thank you all so much for joining me. I know, like I talked about it a little bit, physiotherapy and autism isn't always something that you think of together, and so I appreciate you guys taking the time to come and watch this talk, and hopefully learning about why physiotherapy maybe is something that you should consider including for your child.